without that as well. People that sell combed honey, they'll put those frames in there without the comb, and then they'll just cut out that section of honey and they'll sell comb honey. And I did bring sample honey there, the honey bear and spoons. Afterwards, you can taste some of that. That's not comb honey, that's just the real honey. I do want to alert you, though, that if you eat that, you'll never buy Sue Bee honey at the grocery store again. So I don't want to mess up your shopping habits. But so then they draw it out, right, to make three-dimensional cells. And this would be a brood frame, right? This is a beautiful frame of brood, right? It's chock full, and it's all capped. Those are worker bees that are all going to hatch underneath there. And so that's what you want to see. 10 frames of those in each one of those bottom boxes, right? If that's full of those bees, each one of those are going to be hatching a new bee here coming 3-4 days. You see some of the, I get a pointer here, right? Can you, right? So some of these kind of like bullet shaped here. And right there, those are drone cells, right? So those would be the drone is going to hatch out of there and there, and that's a drone cell there. So they look like a 22 shell, have you ever seen, right? The bullet kind of part coming up. But the worker bee cell will be flat. It's more brown than honey when it's capped with honey underneath it, and that's because they obviously use pollen, and that's where most of the traffic is, the dirt from their feet. But the brood comb in the boxes is usually a little darker like this. This would be a frame full of pollen that they've collected from the flowers. That's what they need in the bottom boxes as well to feed the nurse bees. Will feed the babies as they hatch. So they're filling this baby just chock full of pollen. So when you're looking through and you see that frame, you know, oh, they got good pollen stores. They're ready to raise a lot of bees. And this is a honey frame. These would be the top two. You notice that the white capping on top is much brighter, cleaner looking. So the honeys will pack the cells full of nectar, and they'll dry it, fanning their wings. And then after it dries to a certain moisture percentage, usually, 17% moisture? Yeah, you don't want it to ferment. So I think it's around 16-17% that you're shooting for. Then the bees will cap it. They'll put this nice light cap of wax over top of it. And then we take it off in those boxes, and we bring it to our honey house, and we cut that cap off with a knife, put it in like a big old wash machine, an extractor, and the frames are setting in like this all the way around towards the center, and it just spins around, and the centrifugal force pulls the honey against the side of the box, and then it runs down just like a wash machine does. As it spins around, the honey flies out of those combs. And then there'll still be obviously a little bit of honey on those frames after you extract it, and you put those empty frames out in the bee yard by your hives, and they will go nuts. There'll be a cloud of bees out there, and I should have brought a picture of that, because when they got free honey out there in the dearth where there's not much else, they will go crazy. So these are queen cells. So how does the queen, how can they hatch a new queen? So these are queen cells with the peanut shaped. And so if they happen to be checking my hive and I roll the queen, or I pinched a queen between two frames and I killed her, that was a really stupid mistake. Now they got to make a new queen, right? So this is how they would make a new queen. They would find an egg that's only about 3 days old, and they would start feeding it more royal jelly. You can kind of see in this frame. These are larvae, right? The egg is kind of hatched. If you can kind of see in some of these, it's like a little egg. It's about smaller than a grain of rice. And after 3 days, it'll form a little larvae. And they got to catch it pretty early to make a queen cell. And what they do is they just feed it more royal jelly. So the more royal jelly they feed it, then they can make a queen. And then they'll draw out the cell into a peanut shape and cap it when it's done, and then they'll actually grow a queen. So the difference between a worker cell and a queen cell is basically just how much royal jelly they feed it, basically the nectar mixture that they feed it. So if it's richer jelly, then it's going to turn into a queen. These queen cells are on the side of a frame, so that tells you it's typically a supersedure, which means you killed the queen and they're just growing a new one. or they're unhappy with their queen. She's 3 years old and she's starting to see a spotty pattern. Like this, remember the one frame that I showed you that it was just solid brood the whole way across, right? She could lay that thing full of eggs at the same time. We're going to hatch all these bees at the same time. And then you look at a frame like this where some of it's capped, some of it's, larvae hatched. So she's kind of spotty. The queen is failing. She can't lay that frame full of eggs at the same time. So the other bees sense that. They want to make a new queen, and so that's why they're making these queen cells. The other option...
Do they have a referendum to decide that, okay, we need a new queen?
What's that?
Do they have a referendum to decide that they need to have a new queen?
I'm not sure how the vote takes place, but they all decide that collectively as a colony. The other way would be in the spring when all the bees or the flowers are blooming. They've got plenty of stores, right? There's a lot of honey in the hive. They're feeling crowded. The queen has got every one of those frames chuck full like this. She doesn't have enough room to lay new bees. Then they're going to make a whole bunch of these queen cells, but they're going to be at the bottom of the frame. And they're going to be like just tons of these queen cells. That's swarming cells. Then what's going to happen is all these queen cells, once they're capped, the queen will take off and they'll fly to a tree branch probably about 20 yards from the hive. And then they'll look for a permanent location like your attics and your garages and hollow trees. They'll go and live in that tree and start a new hive. These queen cells will hatch. The first queen to hatch will kill all the other queen cells. Because each hive only has one queen. They will kill until there's only one. So as soon as the first one's hatched, they'll probably kill all the other ones out of there. She'll go on her mating flight 6 days later, come back to the hive, and then she'll be the new queen of that hive that stayed there.
So if you clip the wings of the queen, how does that happen?
So if you clip the wings of your queen, the thought process is that she can't go and swarm then. But what happens sometimes, as some folks from our club have noticed, basically what happened is she swarmed, but she couldn't fly. She basically went underneath the hive. They had their hive up on top of blocks, and they basically formed another colony underneath the hive instead. So, or basically they'll just get to be 4 or 5 years old, and the other bees will say that she's failing. They'll make a queen cells like this. They won't swarm possibly, but she'll be superseded out because she's failing, just got too old.
Do they kill everyone that stays in the room?
They'll probably kill her before she'll probably get the hint and try to leave the hive and die on her own outside the hive. There's a smoker. That's man's best friend if you're going to raise bees. You got to have the smoker lit and going with you because what you want to do is first puff a little bit of smoke in the entrance of the bees, and what that does is mask any pheromones that they give off. As soon as they get upset or anxious, they'll let off a smell or an odor, and the whole hive will immediately sense it and be in attack mode. And if you look in these frames here, they'd all be lined up in there with their heads up, ready to hit you like a bunch of B-52s on a runway. Then you know you better start smoking them because they're a little agitated. And also what they do when you smoke them, they think their hive is in danger. They'll fill themselves up with honey, and they can't lend over to sting you quite as quick either. But the smoke is mainly to mask the pheromones of danger or warning.
Do you wear a whole, like,
I do wear, I used to wear a whole, like a coveralls with a veil and gloves and everything. Now I just wear a jacket with a veil. There'll be times when I could get by without a veil, but I still wear a veil. Some folks go without and they don't wear gloves or anything. I'm starting to do it now a little bit where I don't use gloves, but I'm a little bit allergic to bee stings. I do carry an EpiPen with me when I'm out. It's a little overdue. I need to probably get that updated. Yeah, some folks, and a lot of it depends on the hive. Some bees are just naturally more aggressive, and some people like the aggressive hives. They say they make more honey. I'm at the age of my life, I like calm bees and nice gentle bees, and ones that they can go in and work and not worry about them going crazy and bouncing off your veil when you're in there working them. You always heard about the Africanized bees, right? The African honeybees and how they're the killer bees, and you read about how they swarm and kill people. And there is an African breed, and they are very aggressive like that. And the main thing to do when you get a hive like that is just to requeen them. So that gets rid of that trait, so you get more gentle bees again. So you want to raise queens from your hives that are gentle, good honey producers, low mite counts. So I took off the top lid. I'm looking down in my hive. I took the supers off where the honey is. I'm looking for the queen. Where am I going to find the queen if this is a body looking down from it? In the middle. Very good. The queen is likely to be in the middle. So if the queen is in the middle, which frame am I going to take out first if I'm looking for the queen? You're going to take out the one way on the end. Way on the end, because you don't want to roll the queen. She's got less chance of being out here on the end. You're going to take that frame out, and then you pry them towards the opening every way so you're not pinching the queen. If the queen's on this middle frame and you pull the middle frame out, she could get rolled and damaged as you look it up. So that's what you're doing when you're inspecting a bees. When you inspect the hive, the thing you're looking for is to make sure you see all three stages of brood: cap brood, larvae, and young eggs. Once you see that, there's no sense looking for the queen because you know she's in there. If you got eggs, you know she was alive at least 3 days ago. So pack it up and move on to the next. So there are a lot of diseases with bees these days that makes it much more challenging to raise. This is chalk brood. You can see kind of the normal cell that you wanted to see on that cap brood frame, and then all of a sudden this is sunken and it's white. And that's basically from a bacteria in the hive. And the cure for chalk brood is usually to requeen, get them out in the sun. It's usually as early spring when it's damp and wet. And this, you'll see this out front of the hive where they pull all the mummies after they die inside those cells. They pull them all out in front of your hive. You'll see that out front or on the bottom of your hive. American foul brood is probably the worst disease. It's not as common today anymore, but the field test for that is if you take a matchstick and you stick it in the cell and pull it out and it's real stringy or ropey like this, that's a sure sign of foul brood. And what you have to do is call the state apiarist, Bob Reiners, and you have to burn your hive. So it's that contagious, and the bacteria stays in the hive, and it spreads that fast. There's nothing you can do to get rid of it. You got to burn it, and that's the way so that we can get rid of that disease. Here's another one of American foul brood, and they call it foul brood because it stinks when you lift up the hive. So you see like that larva. Here's a larva that looks fairly healthy, right? These are healthy. That's a good healthy one. But this one, you can see there's something wrong with it, right? Just looking at it, it doesn't look healthy, especially this one that's brown and starts sunken. So you'd start doing a test if you see that in your hive. European foul brood is another one. This one's not as bad. You don't have to kill your hive if you do have a European foul brood. But again, you kind of see the brown larvae in there where it's not healthy and stuff. Requeen it and get rid of that frame. This is probably the number one biggest problem that caused a lot of the colony collapse that you've heard about amongst the bees. It's the varroa mite. It's these little mites on the bee. Right here you can see it, and that's basically to size. So this one's got 2 mites on it. You will never see the mites, not very often anyway, the mites on the bees, but rest assured they are out there and every hive has them. But you want to make sure that those stay small in number. It's basically a parasite that lives on the bees, and it sucks the blood out of them or whatever, makes them weak, and it also spreads diseases. The number one disease that it spreads is deformed wing virus. And the way they spread and they reproduce is just before the cell is capped, right? The queen in the brood boxes lays the egg, it hatches into larvae. They put basically nectar on it, the larvae grows big, and just before it's ready to hatch, they'll cap it. And just before it's capped, those mites will go into these cells and they'll reproduce in those cells. And one mite goes in and 8 come out. So And then they eat on that larvae before it's hatched too, so that's what it makes unhealthy bees. So you want those mite counts low. The way to test for varroa mites is a half a cup of bees, and you have like a thing of alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and you throw the half cup in there, and there's a strainer in there, and then you shake it, and the mites will fall through the screen, and you count them. So a half a cup of bees will be 300 bees, and you want those mite counts to be down around 2 to 3. Anything more than that, you're probably going to be treating. And this fall, I had a couple hives that were just mite bombs. I had over 50, and I had no hopes of those hives making them. And 2 weeks ago, they were both still alive because I bombarded them with oxalic acid vapor is one way to kill the mites without hurting the bees. And so I went full force on those, and so far both of them are alive yet, so we'll see. So hobby beekeeper, what's their calendar look like in March to April? They're going to start bringing in pollen already. The maple and the pines are going to start giving pollens, and you'll see them bringing in pollen into the hive. In May, you're going to see the first nectar flow. Dandelions are beautiful for our bees, so don't cut those pretty yellow flowers off on your yards. Let them grow. Actually, let them grow and then cut them off, but once they turn white, you want to produce new yellow flowers for me. So keep them going. June, July, they're making honey, right? The sweet clovers in the field are the best. Soybeans are good. July and August, you're going to start taking the honey off the end of July, first part of August, and you're going to treat for mites. And then you're going to treat for mites, and then you're going to treat for mites. You get the idea, right? Mites are the really number one reason they're not going to make it through winter if they have that high mite counts in the fall. In November, you're going to prepare them for winter. Typically what I do for winter is I put them all together, and I put styrofoam on 3 sides of them, and the top, and the front I put facing south black tar paper on that to absorb the sun, and they stay like that all winter long.
Is lack of moisture a problem in the winter?
Actually, bees will handle the cold, but if they get wet, they're dead. And so condensation is the biggest problem. And so folks handle condensation because you got this colony, this cluster in the hive, and they're staying at about 90 degrees. They kind of rotate inside to out, and they shake and vibrate to stay warm. And so you got 90-degree bees in this hive, which is just as cold as outside, 20 below, and so there's a lot of condensation in the hive. They'll use that moisture to drink when they need it, but you don't want it dripping on them. And so typically what folks do is they'll have a little opening on the bottom and a little opening up top to create a circular flow so that the air blows out of the hive this way. I never had luck with that because my bottom got full of snow, and then the condensation formed on top of the hive and dripped on them. So what I do is I put like a quilt rack on top of them, which is a burlap sack with sawdust, and that absorbs the moisture before it drips on the hive. And they can drink that during the winter. Good question. Commercial beekeeping, of the 3, pick 2. They can either make bees, they can make honey, or they can pollinate. The number 1 commercial, obviously, for the commercial guys is to pollinate the almond crops in California. And they're getting this year, I heard it was $200 and some per box of bees. So they got to have a good 8 frames of bees. They go down to California and they'll get $200 for that box of bees for pollinating them. But that's it's a risky market too, because 80% of the bees in the United States are in California at that time. So it's a cesspool of diseases and viruses, and everybody's down there. And if your beehive dies, you get to pay for shipping it back without any $200 too. So they can make honey, obviously. A lot of people try to get into South Dakotas, North Dakota in the summer to make honey off the sweet clover pastures, big pasture areas. Or they can make bees. What they're doing is they're selling package bees to folks that want to start new hives. They'll sell packages of bees. They'll sell nukes that way. Addy Honey Farms is the number 1 honey producer in South Dakota. They're the number 1 honey producer in the nation. They're right here in South Dakota. They're by Bruce and Roscoe, South Dakota. 4th generation family operation. They're one of the largest, and they have over 80,000 hives. And they also have kind of set up in Bakersfield, California by the almonds down there. They send out 160 semi-loads of bees to the almonds every year, and they roughly 400 to 450 hives per semi-load. So a big business and a large economic boost to South Dakota, actually, is honey producing. Some fun bee facts: that queen will lay 1,500 eggs in one day in the spring when they're really taking off. 25% of the bees will be foragers, so when you see bees out in your garden, that's only about 25% of the hive. They're going to begin foraging at 18 days, and 8 days later they'll be dead because they've just totally shred their wings from all the flying that they do. So they only last about 8 days in the prime in the summer. Takes 3,500 bees to weigh a pound. Most hives will have about 30,000 to 50,000 bees in it. 12 bees to make a teaspoon of honey. They're going to visit 2 million flowers to make that teaspoon of honey. In visiting some 2 million flowers to produce 1 pound of honey, they're going to fly a combined distance of 55,000 miles. And note the circumference of the earth at the equator is 25. So they're going to fly around the world 2 times to make 1 pound of honey. 1 ounce of honey will fuel a bee flight around the world, around the earth. Talk about good gas mileage. We ought to start thinking about burning honey instead of gas. Bees will go 3 miles from the hive. They flap their wings at about 200 beats per second, and a hummingbird is 70 beats per second. So, interesting facts about the bees.
In the heat of the summer, we set out water our bees. We have 3 colonies. We're not as cool as Dan. They will drink.
Smarter than Dan.
Yeah, they will drink over a gallon, maybe 2 gallons a day.
Yes.
Water.
Yeah, they need a lot of you got to put them by a water source. Cricks are the best thing for them, obviously, because then they get it good. I had a call from actually Ruby Plate is 2 doors down from where I keep my bees out in the country. She says, Dan, I love your bees. They pollinate my apple trees, but they're all the horse water. My horses can't get into the water of the horses because all the bees are using the water. I said, oh, I'm so sorry, Ruby. So I put out 4 of those plastic tote things, and I filled those with. Each one of them got a 5-gallon bucket, and I was filling every 3 days, 4 of those. So I was going through about 20 gallons every 3 days in the summer for my hives. So go plant flowers that bloom year-round because they got to have that constant nectar source and pollen source, not just bloom once a year and they're done. Don't spray for mosquitoes when the bees are out during the daylight hours of the summer. Spray for those at night. That's when the mosquitoes are out anyway. And if you see swarm, call a beekeeper. Don't spray them and kill them. So, any questions?
Is there any truth to, like local honey for allergy, helping out with allergy conditions?
Yeah, so a lot of people buy honey from me for allergies. I'm not a doctor, and I don't claim to be. And so Dr. Quayle could probably give you some medical advice on that. But the old treatment for allergies was you got a shot, right? And what they're doing is trying to build up resistance to it. Now they're doing subliminal drops. They'll put drops under the tongue for things that you're allergic to. And honey is kind of on that nature of that type of a treatment, because if it's local honey, it's made from pollens in that area. And so you'll be getting those types of pollen and hopefully build up your immunity to it. That's the philosophy behind it. Whether it works or not, I will stay out of that debate. Especially with a doctor present, I'll stay out of that debate.
Yeah, I mean, the principle's the same as the treatment, so, but I don't think it works for everyone. Depends on what your particular elements are.
Yeah. And your pollen has to be what you're allergic to, right? If you're allergic to ragweed, that honey better came from ragweed pollen. So. Yeah.
For all the assaults that the hives have had over the years, I've seen data that the production of honey in North America has either been studied or going up, which seems to be a contradiction.
Yeah, so, I mean, they're hugely adaptive, right? I mean, when that queen's laying 15,000 eggs a day, Addie folks, these Addie, they're raising like 80,000 bees. I talked to a guy in February from Roscoe. He said they used to have 240,000 hives, or they were up to that much at one time. But I've had 50% loss in a year where half of my hives would die in the winter, but by the end of the year I'm back up full force again because I can split and make new hives from that one hive. I can actually take one hive and I can make 3 hives if I want to make 3 nukes. And so they reproduce very quickly. So that's how they've been able to overcome a lot of the problems of colony collapse.
How is the status of natural bee, colonies? How are they? You talked about farming, bee farming, but in nature, in ecosystem, how are they surviving? How are they?
So in nature, as far how dangerous they are?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, they'll be of the same.
Dangerous, but their survival,
How do they survive via the things? So I actually was on a Zoom meeting, B meeting with a guy up in New York State, very forest, and he said they'll find 2 hives per square mile out there, and that was before CCD, colony collapse disorder, and then after that, totally decimated, right? But the thing, it's kind of like survival of the fittest, right? Some of the bees were naturally immune, some of them naturally grew more and got rid of the varroa mites. Some of them would actually actively go in and they see the cells that have varroa in, and they'll uncap them and pull those out so that the varroa can't multiply. So those obviously are going to be the ones that survive, and then they'll reproduce. And he says those forests are now back up to two hives per square mile. They've reproduced with those types of bees that are actually, those are the ones you want to try to catch swarms from for introducing into your apiary as well, because they have a natural resistance to mites. And swarm capturing is another. I mean, I put out empty boxes. I have about 5 I set out in the summers, and I usually get about 2 or 3 swarms a year that way, new hives.
I remember vaguely that sometime back about some 5, 10, 12 years ago, there was an attack on California bees or something, and they were in kind of crisis of,
Yeah.
some kind of endangered situation.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't want to downplay it. They are resilient. They can multiply very fast. But colony collapse in that 1 year took out so many of them that they were worried about the almonds, right? Almonds is a huge economic boom to the United States, right? And so if they don't get those almonds pollinated, they're not going to produce almonds. And that was huge when all of a sudden they were worried about getting those things pollinated. When you think about 80% of the hives in the whole United States, that's Florida, New York, Texas, all going down to California just to take care of the almonds, that's pretty big. There's a lot of almond trees. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. Any other news for the good of the group?